Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiro Vanachari Yamuna Tiro Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Bihari
Shri Srimati Chanali Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, everybody. Hope you can
Hare
hear
Krishna.
me.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hope you can see
Hare
the
Krishna.
screen. Hare Krishna. So, Happy New Year to everyone. It's
Happy New
2021.
Year.
Happy New Year. This year just went by, without realizing. There's a lot happened actually, but I think most people were all in lockdown, and it just seemed like a flash. And we hope the new year brings us either for the good or bad, whatever the situation be. We can just hope that we continue to take shelter in Krishna. He is the supreme director. He's charting out the plan for the entire world, and he is in full control of every minute details. So we are simply carried away in emotions of time in whatever situation we are, but whether for what might appear as good or bad from external perspective, in either case, I think we should always seek to take more shelter of Krishna. I think that's the only thing that we could do. So having said that, I wish you all success, all happiness, and more and more we are inspired to take shelter of Krishna. I think that's at that note, I think we can begin today's class. So last time we ended at verse number 38. if I remember it right. Yes. And so we'll continue from text number 39. So as I did last time, what I'm going to do is, we will now approach Bhagavad Gita in more like in a thematic fashion. And what I mean by that is that in order to ensure that there is continuity or flow of the story itself, right? It's a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, and this conversation progresses in themes. And so when we go into like a detailed study, verse by verse, going into purports, what happens is that we might lose the context of the larger context of how the conversation is progressing. And so what I'll try to do going forward is especially now that we're going to get into more detailed or more complex philosophies. So it's not like super complex, but the conversation is now getting a little bit more intense. So considering that, we'll try to break it down into chunks of different themes. And then I'll read the translations, all the successive translations in that thematic fashion, and then explain. I'll comment on that, and then we'll go into the commentary of Srila Prabhupada and cover some important points. And in that way, you don't lose the broader perspective of Bhagavad Gita. And so we took that approach last week. It seemed to me that it worked fine, but if there is any feedback or any comments on that, I'm willing to take that right now. If anyone wants to share if it went well or not, if you're fine with that approach.
I think it worked really well.
Okay, so that's good to know. Okay. So now the theme so far in the second chapter was, first of all, Krishna analytically explained what is the nature of the soul and how it is different from the body, and why Arjuna should not lament for the loss of body, because loss of body does not mean loss of soul. Arjuna was worried specifically about his grandfather and his teacher. So that was the first theme. And the second theme, Krishna, after explaining the soul analytically, was he explained from the perspective of worldly consideration, meaning he specifically said that, hey, for Kshatriya especially, honor is, dishonor is worse than death. And so if Arjuna leaves the battlefield for a higher cause, what he thinks as a higher cause, which is that he's not that he's afraid of fighting, but then he's out of compassion he doesn't want to fight. So Krishna is saying that no one is going to understand your perspective. They won't say that, hey, Arjuna left the battlefield out of compassion. They would say that Arjuna just left because he's a coward, right? And that will bring you dishonor, and that's going to be worse than death, right? You say that I would rather die, but if it seems that you're fine giving up your own life for the sake of saving the lives of others, but this is going to bring you dishonor, and this dishonor is going to be worse than death, because it's like you will be dying at every single moment, right? People will say harsh words to you. So after that theme, Krishna in this verse, as we'll read, he's saying that now I'm going to explain or present an argument against what, or counter argue the points that you had presented, and emphasize in terms of working without fruitive results. And what it means by fruitive results is that a lot of Vedic injunctions in the scriptures, which they say that, hey, you have to, this is the duties that you should perform, this is what you should be doing, this is what you should not be doing. So all this fruitive, your fruitive means that you do something and in result you get some benefit, right? So if you look at the Vedic scriptures, you have dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So moksha is ultimately liberation. But what are the first three aspects of the injunctions in the Vedas? So one is you perform religious activities, named specifically different kind of fire sacrifices or yagyas, and in the expectation that I'll get some benefit out of it, which could be some benefit in the present life, good health, good money, good status. But beyond that, a lot of the sacrifices they are meant to achieve heavenly planets. And then one goes to the heavenly planets, enjoys in the heavens for some time, but those destinations are also of temporary existence. As long as one's pious credits are there, one can continue to reside in the heavenly planets, but after that one has to again come back to this earth. So Krishna is going to present now his thoughts or his arguments from the perspective of fruitive results, which are or the fruitive activities which are described in the Vedas, right? So the first two themes we already talked about: analytical study. Then, there was some worldly consideration about honor, dishonor, and now Krishna is going to talk about working without fruitive results. Because so far, when Krishna was telling Arjuna that, hey, you should fight because it's your duty to fight, so Arjuna might have thought that, hey, he's saying from the perspective of Vedic injunctions, and Arjuna very well understands that the Vedic injunctions are meant for achieving fruitive results, right? Say if you do your duty, your prescribed duties according to your varna, then you will get the benefits which are again described in the Vedas. Like specifically, Krishna had made the argument earlier that, hey, whether you die or win, it's a win-win situation, because if you win, you're going to enjoy a kingdom, right? Or there's some enjoyment associated with it. Though Arjuna is not interested in that kind of enjoyment. Any reason the Pandavas were wanting to fight was for righteous reason, to be able to rule the world in a righteous fashion. But Krishna also says that even if you are to die, most warriors, they are happy to be engaged in a war which is uninvited for. That means, many times warriors, they want to fight willingly, because they know that, hey, if they die while fighting, then they would be elevated to heavenly planets, right? So that is a fruitive mentality. So here when it says fruitive results, so sometimes, though they might be more inclined to fight as opposed to avoiding a fight, but Arjuna was not like that. And saying that, Krishna is saying, this fight is coming to you uninvited. You try to avoid this fight in all the possible ways, still the fight is coming to you. And the Kshatriyas, they look for such kind of opportunities, because they know that, hey, if they die in a battlefield, they would be elevated to heavenly planets. And so that is a fruitive mentality. But now Krishna's arguments are going to be working without fruitive results, right? So he says, okay, the prescribed duties are there, but don't, it might have come across to you that I'm encouraging you to engage in fruitive results, because when he says that, hey, even if you die, you will achieve heavenly planets, so it might appear to Arjuna like that. But now Krishna is going to explicitly mention without any confusion that there is a higher purpose. These are worldly consideration, honor, dishonor. I know I mentioned that, Krishna is saying, Arjuna, but beyond that there is a higher cause, beyond fruitive results, beyond honor. What is that? That is working without fruitive mentality, right? So Krishna is going to present these arguments. In the end, Arjuna again will ask, well, if if you're encouraging me to not be involved in this karmic reaction, then why ask me to fight to begin with, right? So that's the final question Arjuna will ask later. But then Krishna will later clarify that when I say that the intention is not to be engaged in fruitive reaction, that doesn't mean that you don't do your prescribed duties. So you still have to do your prescribed duties, but without the fruitive mentality. And so that is what karma yoga is. So that discussion of karma yoga will begin. So having said that, let me just dive into the specific translation. And I'm sure you would have a lot of questions, and karma yoga is not very well understood. There are a lot of doubts and confusions, and we'll address that systematically. So let me start with verse number 39. Here Krishna says, thus far I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. So here is referring to the description of the soul. in an analytical fashion, right? Which is what we discussed earlier. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pritha, right? So Pritha is another name of Kunti. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of the work. So this is the key point, which Krishna will later clarify. The acting in proper knowledge is what frees one from the bondage of works. So whether that bondage could be due to pious activities, because pious activities also bind. One has to take another birth to enjoy the results of one's pious activities. So that is also a bondage. So you might say bondage through a golden chain as opposed to an iron one. So similarly, if there are impious activities, then that also leads to bondage. Then one gets bad karma. But in either case, there is bondage. But when one acts in proper knowledge, right? And what is that proper knowledge? We'll discuss that later. But when one acts in proper knowledge, then one can free oneself from the bondage of the works. So that is the theme of the next verses. Text 40. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. So here Krishna is referring that generally when one is engaged in fruitive activities, that leads to bondage. That means one accrues karma, and then one has to enjoy or suffer the reactions or the results of that karma. But that reaction is temporary, right? It will eventually perish, whether it's a punishment or a reward, right? It's not eternal. So there is a loss, there is a diminution of both pious or impious activities, or the reactions to the pious and impious activities. There is a diminution. But when one acts without fruitive results, without that fruitive mentality, just as a sense of duty for a higher cause, for the purpose of sacrifice, then such an action, there is no loss or diminution, and that is karma yoga. And even if one does not achieve perfection on this path, right, one might make little progress but not achieve complete perfection, then also one need not worry, because it will save one from the most dangerous type of fear. So here Krishna is referring to degrading into lower species of life. If in the human form of life, if one does not make good use of this human life and develops lower propensities, which are seen mostly in animal species of life, or the aquatics or the plants, such kind of mentality where one does not really develop any spiritual inquisitiveness. One beyond that, one even does not follow basic moral principles of austerity, mercy, cleanliness, truthfulness, then one degrades into lower species of life. But when a yogi starts this process, beginning with karma yoga, right? And even if that yogi does not complete the path, in the next life, one will be still awarded a human form of life. And so one can continue from where they left, right? So it's not that they will start from scratch. In this world, the experience that we have, that if you don't do a job perfectly, it's mostly it's all waste, right? You again, the entire effort is lost unless one actually achieves perfection. Or a better way to explain this is that, okay, even if whatever benefit one gets, right? Some might say that even if I did not get full success, maybe there is a partial benefit, but that partial benefit is not eternal. It's not going to last forever. Just like somebody might be elevated to heavenly planets, and they might live in the heavenly kingdom for a very long duration of time. But that long duration of time is also not, has a fixed duration. It's not that it is never ending. So in that sense, there is a loss or diminution for any kind of karmic reaction. But in this path, there is no loss or diminution. So whatever spiritual progress one makes, Krishna takes that into account, and one gets an opportunity to continue from the same point in time, where same point of progress where one stopped in one's previous life. Later Krishna says, those who are on this path are resolute in purpose and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. So here Krishna is referring that when one really understands what is karma yoga and how karma yoga transcends karma kanda. So karma kanda is the prescribed injunctions in the Vedas, which is dharma. It is good thing to do. It's not bad thing to do. It's good thing to do. But there is the motivation of that is some sort of material gain, right? And nowadays we don't see that religiosity has in general gone down, so people might not even be aware about it. But in the previous times, when the Vedic knowledge was more common, and there are different kind of injunctions and there which they are very alluring to the people, right? They are tempted by the alluring, what do you call it, the alluring descriptions in the Vedas, where they said, hey, if I do this kind of yajna, right, then this, they're tempted to enjoy the kind of benefits either in this life or the next life. Sometimes they want to do it for their pitris, their forefathers, right? And because of that, what happens is that this flowery language of the Vedas, they carry away the mind of the people. I mean, in a way, they are engaging them in the dharmic activities, but they lose the ultimate aim, because especially if they don't understand the higher purpose, which is beyond karma kanda. They might even know about it, or even if they might know about it to some extent, they are not resolute in purpose. They are not fixed in their determination to achieve that higher goal. And so what happens is that intelligence is carried away into so many different directions. Their intelligence is many branched, because maybe they want to pursue this kind of allurement or benefit, which is described in the Vedas, and then they are attracted by something else over there. And so they spend their life. It's good, at least they are acting in dharmic activities, but then it's a kind of a vicious cycle where you perform karma kanda on this earth, get elevated to heavenly planets, stay there for some time, and once the pious career is over, you come back to this earth, again do karma kanda. So you just keep repeating, going, it's like a Ferris wheel, right? So Krishna is saying is, well, one has to be determined or resolute in this purpose. If one is not, then one might be attracted by so many different kind of allurements present in the Vedas, which it describes in the next verse. So he says, men of small knowledge, they are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities. So fruitive, as I say it again, refers to the fruit of an action. Just like you sow a seed, the seed grows into a sapling, and then it grows into a plant, a tree, and then it bears fruits. And ultimately, the fruits is the most is the most beneficial part of the tree, right? In other plants, well, you can say you can make vegetables. There might be some benefits of the bark or the root for medicinal purposes. So all that is there, but ultimately it's the fruit, the juicy ripened fruit, the sweet delicious fruit that everyone that's the most desirable. And so that's the kind of metaphor that is used to refer to as fruitive activities over here, which is specifically elevation to the heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth. So in this life, whenever we come across someone who has some of these opulences, good beauty, good education, high birth, status, then one must understand that this is the benefit of some of the pious activities that they would have performed in the previous life. Like, there are people who are born, in such opulence or such situations. So they have a, added advantage to even begin, right? And, if they might waste that good birth and might degrade into, if they don't use it properly, they can again degrade into lower species of life, as we mentioned in verse 40. So that danger is there, but at least they unlike others who might not have those kind of opulences, these people at least have that kind of advantage because of the pious activities that they performed in their previous life. Yeah, so being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say that there is nothing more than this, right? Some of them might not even have the knowledge about the other parts of the Vedas, which focus not just on dharma, artha, kama, right? So kama is sense gratification, and they might only be aware of these three divisions of the Vedas: dharma, artha, kama. Again, dharma, artha, kama, right? They don't need to think about moksha. And so they say there is nothing beyond this, right? They don't mind going in this repeated cycle, though there's some trouble associated with it, because they say, I can just keep going on in this fashion. Obviously, there is a chance that in some life they might stop doing those pious activities or the recommended sacrifices, which eventually happens for one reason or another reason, and then that cycle is broken. They might devolve into lower species of life. Then Krishna says, in the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, that means they are attracted by such promises in the Vedas, the resolute purpose or the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place, right? So it's just like if a student wants to study for an examination, right, they might have an option to either live in the dormitory or they can get a private residence outside the campus. But in either case, those who are serious about studying, right, they would be very careful in selecting residence where the atmosphere is more conducive for studies, right? Or if they are not careful, suppose they end up in a party school where there's just too much fraternity and sorority parties going on. Students, they get drunk, and a lot of other kind of bewilderments, and they might be attracted by those. And with such kind of ambience, it's very difficult for any individual to study. And so similarly, people who are attached to sense enjoyment, or they are not very resolute in that purpose, they won't be able to focus on devotional service to the Supreme Lord, because that requires some discipline, some cadence of regular schedule for sadhana, which is practice of japa, practice of reading Bhagavad Gita regularly, understanding that philosophy, applying in your life. So it requires patience, dedication, determination, right? But when is attached by different kind of allurements of sense enjoyment, then they are bewildered by it, and the resolute determination for devotional service does not take place. And so this is one of the reasons that the human form of life, especially in Bharata Varsha, is something that is desired even by the demigods in the heavenly planets. Because in the heavenly planets, some of the demigods who have some understanding about the ultimate aim of life, they think that in the heavens, there is again no karma, in the sense that, let me clarify what I mean by that. What I mean by that is the recommended injunctions for performing sacrifices, right? That is specifically for people on this mortal world, right? I mean, even the demigods are mortal in one way, but they have a much longer duration of life. So the recommendations of karma kanda are meant for people of this earth, right? In heaven, they don't engage in those kind of activities. It's purely enjoyment, right? And some of the even moral codes of behavior, right, what we consider as a morality, even do not apply to the heavenly planets, because it's like a party place. They are able to enjoy in so many unlimited ways that that allurement is so strong, even they know that ultimate purpose of life, even if they might know that the ultimate purpose of life is to perform devotional service to Supreme Lord Vishnu, uh, they might not take it up. And so they they say that, hey, it's better to take birth as a human being in Bharatavarsha, because that's an ideal situation. Neither is the condition in the human form of life where the senses are so strong and so powerful and there is unlimited opportunity to enjoy that kind of sensual pleasures. And so, they are not allured or attracted by that to the extent that we are attracted as demigods in heavenly planets. At the same time, in lower species of life or the lower planetary systems or in other places, not lower planetary systems, but other species of life, especially animal form of life, again, they don't have the intelligence to understand the higher philosophy. At the same time, they are constantly trying to either protect themselves from being attacked by predators, or they are searching for food, or they are searching for shelter. They are trying to protect themselves from the elements of the nature. So it's not possible for them to take up spiritual life, nor in the hellish planets where the living beings, they are subject to unlimited misery, right? And that misery is so intense that there is no possibility for doing anything like devotional service or understanding philosophy or taking up any kind of process. So the both kind of extremities, they are not suitable. In one sense, in one case, there is so much allurement like for the demigods that it's not possible for them to easily give up that kind of attraction and take up spiritual practice very seriously. And similarly, in the hellish conditions, the pain is so intense that it's still not possible. So that's why the human form of life, especially in Bharatavarsha, where this knowledge is available in much more refined and detailed way, that birth is envied even by the demigods. So yeah, so the resolute determination of devotional service does not take place for people who are attracted by sense enjoyment and by material opulence. In the about last month, I quoted the examples of during Damodar month, quoted the example of the two sons of Kuvera, Manigriva and Nal Kuvera. So Kuvera is the treasurer of the demigods. He has access to a lot of wealth, and often in this world also we see that sometimes individuals or the children of those who are uber rich, they are spoiled, and they basically spend their life in different kind of enjoyments and opulences, and they spoil it, right? It's an opportunity that is spoiled. Not everyone does that, but that risk is there. So the Vedas, they deal mainly with the subject of the three modes of nature. So this is a verse in the Sanskrit. It says, Traiguniya Visayo Vedo. So Vedas, Traiguniya means the three gunas, which is the three modes of nature, Sattva, Raja, Tamas. Vedas, they primarily deal with the subject matter of the of the modes of nature. As I had explained earlier, everything in this world has to do with is a product of the three modes of nature, right? Just like in a digital world, the entire creation is binary. The operating system is made up of zeros and ones. The programs that run on the operating system, they are also made up of zeros and ones. The files or the data which is processed by those programs is also made up of zeros and ones. Similarly, the creation of the Supreme Lord Vishnu through the agency of Brahma is ternary in creation. That means instead of zeros and ones in the digital world, the creation is basically combination in different proportions of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And this three in different combination, first of all, create the 24 elements, which we had talked in detail, how mind is created, intelligence is created, contaminated consciousness is created, and how mind expands into the three subtle perception, sorry, the five subtle perceptions, which is the perception of the taste, smell, form, touch, and sound, and the intelligence, how it expands into five working senses and five knowledge acquiring senses, and then how the contaminated consciousness expands into the definitions of the five gross elements. And then this 24 elements further expand into everything that we see in this world. So everything is a product of the three modes of nature. And the Vedas, they deal with how one can navigate this entire creation, which is made up of these three modes, how one can elevate to a better location within this creation, to the higher planets. And that portion of the Vedas is so vast that the ultimate purpose of the Vedas, which is to get out of it, is completely lost. It's like, somebody might be lost in a virtual reality, right? You might be playing Xbox, and you have so many different games, and sometimes people, they are too much, a lot into gaming, right? They almost live an alternate reality where I mean, they might be interested in getting clearing different what they call like levels in the game and acquiring different points or statuses, and they move from one world to another world, right? Like they have all this digital world, so it's almost like that, but this is a creation of the God. And so Vedas, they help one navigate through, gives directions and prescriptions for living beings to navigate within this material creation, which in a way is, I'm comparing to a virtual world, because in a way it is virtual, in the sense that the actual reality is beyond this creation of the Lord, the temporary material world. So the Krishna is saying, Arjuna, one has to become transcendental to these three modes. One has to come out of it. The purpose of life is not to, go continuously in this cycle of achievements, higher achievements, and again coming down into, once those past credits are over, coming back to this world in the human form of life. And so for this reason, he's asking him to be free from all the dualities. So as long as the dualities of good or bad, pious, impious, those dualities continues, one has to enjoy or suffer the reactions, and in this way they are trapped in this cycle of repeated birth and death. So then for this reason, he's advising him to be free from all anxieties for the gain and safety, and be established in the self. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, because the anxiety for gain and safety is living beings, either they want to achieve something, and after they achieve something, they want to make sure that they are able to maintain it, they don't lose it, and so both creates anxiety, and if they lose it, then obviously it leads to further anxiety. So any kind of achievement that one seeks in this material world is anxiety from beginning to end. There's a lot of anxiety and effort in getting it, and once one gets it, one is afraid that it will attract unnecessary attention from undesirable elements of the society who might want to legally or illegally take away my wealth or position. And then when that does happen, then again it creates anxiety. So in that sense, there is suffering at all levels, but at least temporarily, when one gets it, it creates the illusion, or at least we have that feeling that, hey, I've achieved something, and that might bring some pleasure. And so, and when one loses it, then obviously it's very obvious, and it's anxiety. So there is happiness and there is anxiety, and so there are different kind of dualities in that fashion. So it's better that one overcomes those kind of dualities and be established in the self. So one of the names of Krishna is Atmaram, meaning one who is satisfied in the self. One does not need something external to be satisfied. And that is a state that we can also achieve, because ultimately we are also soul, we are part and parcel of Krishna. So if we realize our true identity, then we can also be Atmaram. So I think I'll take a pause over here, and we'll go into the purports for all the verses that we discussed so far. I mean, thematically, this topic goes on up until verse number 53, but I think there will be quite many verses. So I think we'll um, break this theme down into two sections, and then we can go into the discussion or specific elaboration on these verses. But the theme again is Krishna is trying to explain a higher cause now. He says, I talked about a little bit about duty, that as Kshatriya you should fight, right? But most people understand that duty from a very fruitive mentality, that hey, if I do this, then even if I die, I'll achieve the heavenly kingdom, or other kind of allurements. During peacetime, Kshatriyas have different set of duties that they perform, uh, which are prescribed, but they are all generally, the common understanding of people is they are motivated for some sort of gain, and so Krishna is trying to present a higher cause, which is the setting this setting the tone for karma yoga. Any questions on this before we dive into specific explanations as presented by Srila Prabhupada and his purports? Anyone?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes.
I had a question. So I was listening to a Srimad Bhagavatam class a couple of weeks back, and the Mataji who was speaking on that topic, she mentioned an example where, let's say, if I have borrowed some money from someone, and I fail to repay that money in my current birth, in some way or the other, I have to come back just to make sure I repay the debt in whichever form.
Yeah.
But the person that I have borrowed the money also has to come back, because he or she has to now accept that whatever I have to pay.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I understand this? Like, I understand I fail to do my karma, or I have to go through this action of paying the debt. But how do I understand the same thing for the other person? Like,
Yeah.
how is his or her karma getting intertwined with mine, so that he or she also has to take birth again?
Right, because you see, when somebody gives in charity as a part of sacrifice, there is a different, right? So they are not giving it with the intention of getting it back. So generally, charity in the Vedic culture is charity that is given to the Brahmanas, because it's interesting, how things develop. So Brahmanas, they voluntarily accept poverty for a higher cause, right? Because if they accept salary, then they cannot say the truth, because they're saying, hey, my livelihood would now be endangered. Because if I say the truth, somebody doesn't like the truth, so I won't speak the truth. The Brahmanas are supposed to guide the society, especially the kings and the Kshatriyas. So they voluntarily accept poverty. Like Chanakya Pandit, he used to live outside the kingdom in a small hut, right? If you look at Sudama, he was poor. Dronacharya was so poor he couldn't even afford milk for his own son. And so Brahmana is only 1 or 2% of the population in general. They are not large in numbers, and they are guiding, but the society. Now there is no unemployment in the Vedic times. The unemployment, even up until very recent time, there was no unemployment. Unemployment began only after the Industrial Revolution, because earlier either you have a farm, the king will make sure you have a farm. Even in the Western countries, there was serfdom and people hated serfdom, but the king engaged them, right? And maybe in those cases there was exploitation. It's not an ideal Vedic civilization, but they always they were maintained. So the unemployment it's a very it's unique to industrial civilization. So anyway, coming back to the point, is the sacrifice generally that is given, especially by Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, it ultimately the charity that is given is part of yajnas. So you do a yajna for satisfaction of Vishnu. At the same time, you invite different brahmanas and everyone else, and you feed them and give them cloth and cows and other kind of different kind of necessities that they can use in their life. But when it is given out, it is not given out with the intention of getting it back, right? So that is charity. So that does not uh, implicate one in a karmic situation where one has to come back to get those same things back from those people who were benefited by the charity, because there is no desire for gaining it back. Now in those cases it might be possible that if one does that with the fruitive mentality that by doing this I will be elevated to heavenly kingdom, or I might get a better birth, then obviously they have to come back and take that better birth, or take birth as a demigod. But if somebody is giving, so Vaishyas, they are allowed to give money on loan on interest, right? So now they are expecting a return, right? And if that person is not able to repay in that life, generally in Vedic tradition, the debt passes on to the children. The son takes the debt. So this is not allowed in the modern society, because again there have been cases of bonded labor and other kind of exploitation. But in those kind of scenarios, suppose there is no son, or when the son is not able to repay, and the creditor feels that hey, I really need to get that back, right? And so there is this the desire to get that at least the principal, or the principal and the interest back, and so one has to take birth. So in that sense, one can understand that there is an implication for the creditor as well.
Okay, Prabhuji.
Does it make sense?
Yes, Prabhuji. I have more follow-up questions, but we can discuss later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else has any other questions? Okay. So we'll go into the verse number 39. Esa te abhihita sankhye buddhir yoge tva imam shrinu buddhya yukto yaya partha karma bandham prahashyasi. Thus far I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pratha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. Purport. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining the meaning of Sankhya. So Sankhya in most Indian languages, right, refers to what? Counting. Sankhya means a number or counting. But Sankhya, so Sankhya is a branch of philosophy, and it comes from Sankhya. So if you look at the description over here, Sankhya, right? So and then this one is Sankhya. So the emphasis is different. There is a R sound after Sa. Here is a R sound after Ya. So Sankhya is a philosophy that is based on counting. What it literally means is that when you analyze something, you break it down into components, and then you can count those components. Just like in matter, you can count, we divide it into 24 different elements, right? So that's an analytical study of matter. So here Sankhya again refers to analytical study. That means you analytically try to break down different elements of nature. Let's say 24 elements. And then when you do that, you say that how the gross body is different from subtle, how the working senses, how they're different from the knowledge acquiring senses, how mind is different from intelligence, how it is different from ego, and how soul is different from all these entities, right? So that is analytical study. So Krishna explained the reality of the soul from an analytical perspective. And now he's going to elaborate from the perspective of fruitive, not working without the fruitive mentality. So Prabhupada's explaining over here that Arjuna's proposal not to fight was based on sense gratification, and he had forgotten his prime duty, right? And so he wanted he had forgotten his duty as a Kshatriya and he wanted to fight. He wanted to cease fighting, right? Out of the sense of what he thought was a compassion. He says by not killing his relatives and kinsmen, he thought he would be happier. As opposed to if he had to kill them and even get the kingdom, he won't be able to enjoy, since everyone that he cared about or cared for would have all passed away. So in this way, the model or the framework that he was using to decide what he should do was not based on prescribed duties according to the Vedas. What was the basic principle? His guiding principle was sense gratification, right? And so that is being condemned by Krishna over here. Happiness derived from conquering them or happiness derived by seeing the kinsmen alive. In both cases, what is the framework? Regardless of what the outcome is. One outcome is, well, if he wins, and then he won't be happy because all his relatives would have died. Or he would be happy by seeing them alive, right? Even if he loses the kingdom. But in both cases, what was his pros and cons? What are the arguments and counter arguments? What was the framework? The framework was not based on duties. The framework was based on his personal sense gratification. And so this is the pivot by which Krishna is saying that, hey, I'm presenting you a different framework by which you should look at things. And that goes beyond your current perspective of trying to analyze based on sense gratification. It instead looks at prescribed duties, but not prescribed duties, because prescribed duties could also be materially motivated, right? As I said, right? Hey, in the next life, this is what I'll get, right? By doing my prescribed duties. See, Krishna is saying that I'm going to present a framework which is going to be beyond that kind of material motivation, where one can work without that kind of fruitive mentality. So therefore Krishna wanted to explain Arjuna that by killing the body of his grandfather, he would not be killing the soul, right? So that is the analytical study that he already explained. And this is summary of those descriptions where Krishna already explained that, hey, there was never a time where I did not exist, you did not exist, king did not exist. So Prabhupada is summarizing that, right? So here is a summary of that analytical study that is presented by Srila Prabhupada. And we already discussed that in detail in previous verses. Okay, now Srila Prabhupada is further elaborating on the meaning of Sankhya. So in the Nirukti dictionary, Sankhya is explained. Now there is another philosophy of Sankhya that I mentioned, right? So the analytical study of matter is done by theists and atheists alike, right? So there was another philosopher called Kapil, and this is a different Kapil from the Kapila who is the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the son of Devahuti and Kardama Muni, who appeared in Satya Yuga, and he presented the theistic science of Sankhya philosophy, where not only Kapila Muni analytically breaks down matter into 24 elements, but beyond that, he explains what the soul is and what the super soul is and what the purpose of life is. So that is the theistic science of Sankhya. But there was another imposter, Kapila, who was an atheist, and he also presented that Sankhya, and his philosophy of Sankhya, though it was analyzing matter, it did not go into the higher aspects, that hey, beyond matter there is soul. So here Srila Prabhupada is just clarifying that we do not follow the atheistic philosophy of Sankhya, rather we follow the theistic philosophy of Sankhya, which is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto by Kapila, who is the incarnation of Lord Krishna himself. And he explained this to his mother, Devahuti. So you might have heard about this place. So in India, generally when the forefathers or the parents they pass away, or anyone that passes away, they perform the last rites, pindadan, right, for the liberation of the deceased. So for when the father is deceased, they generally go to Gaya, right, so to perform pitri, right. The pitri, the ceremony for the pitris, is performed in Gaya. So Gaya is in Bihar, present day Bihar. But for performing the last rites for one's passed away mother, they go to this place called Siddhapur. It's in Gujarat. It's the bank of river Saraswati. Of course, there's only dry river bed right now. There is no river, but the place is still there. And the reason why they go over there, because this is the place where the Kapila Muni was born, and in Satya Yuga, and he expanded this philosophy of Sankhya, which is described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he explained this to his mother, Devahuti, who was very interested in learning from his son, who was an incarnation of Krishna himself. And by following those instructions, she got liberated at the end of the life. So that is the connection, like just like Kapila Muni liberated his mother by presenting these the theistic philosophy of Sankhya, and the emphasis is more on practicing, right? But the tradition somehow started where for performing the last rites for one's passed away mother, people from all parts of India or maybe around the world, they come to Siddhapur in Gujarat to perform that, and for performing the last rites of one's passed away father, they would go to Gaya. But if we actually look at the essence of achieving liberation, is more to if you really look at what the pastimes of Kapila Muni and Devahuti, it's not simply performing a sacrifice or a ritual, but rather the teachings of Kapila Muni that were presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. By following that, one can achieve perfection and liberation, not so much by performing a ritualistic ceremony, and that is the real import. But the tendencies in general is for people to simplify it and water it down and break it, so to the extent that it just ends up being a mechanical ritual. But the real import is the teachings of Kapila Muni as he presented in Srimad Bhagavatam, and who explained it to his mother, Devahuti. So over there, it is clearly explained by Kapila Muni that Purusha, the Supreme Lord Vishnu, he is active. He is the one who creates this Prakriti, and this is the conclusion of all Vedic literature, including the Vedas and the Gita. The description in the Vedas, they indicate that the Supreme Lord Mahavishnu, simply by glancing Prakriti, it impregnated it with individual souls, right? So it's like a sandbox where the children are given a sandbox to create castles in sand, right? So the living beings who wanted to enjoy independently of Krishna, they are given an opportunity to do that in this sandbox, which is 1/4 of the creation, call it Prakriti. So the Lord impregnates the soul in this material world, and it happens successively in different phases. We won't go into all those details. Maybe I might have described it in one of the previous classes. But the essence of this is that the Prakriti is in the control of Purusha, Vishnu. So he creates Prakriti, and this Prakriti is impregnated by individual atomic souls. So all the living beings, they are working very hard in this material nature. And what is the motivation? Enjoyment, right? That's the reason the living beings came to this world. They wanted to enjoy independently of Krishna. And so because they are under the spell of the material energy, and they are thinking to be enjoyers, now the enjoyment can happen without the dharmic principles, right? So that's why the materialist, hardcore atheistic materialist would argue that when they look at the codes of the scriptures, they say that, oh, there is dharma, and then there is artha and there is kama. So why you have to do dharma? To get artha. We can create industries and we can produce goods for material comfort without following dharma, right? So that could be the counter argument. But again, the Vedas, why they then my question, why do the Vedas then encourage that kind of sense enjoyment? But the thing is that the living entities have that desire, right? So if we artificially try to suppress it, it's not going to work. They will somehow or other find avenues to uh, act on the propensities for which they came to the material world. So rather, if we provide them a dharmic way of pursuing that, then they are at least fixed in dharma and they have some idea of dharma. And eventually what would happen is that they might question that, okay, what is the purpose of all this? And they might be interested in other parts of dharma which goes beyond artha and kama, which is moksha. And so at least it provides an ambience or a framework where the ultimate objective is still within the scope, though there might not be interest. But if the dharmic framework is not there to begin with, right, then the atheistic model of sense gratification by producing industrial goods, the Vedic civilization, you don't have industries, but the everything is about instant sense gratification. If I'm going to read something, I want instant. I can go to Amazon Kindle, download, I can read. If I want any content, media, music, you use Amazon Prime or Netflix, or everything is about instant gratification, right? So the entire enterprise is made in a way where the urge to have that instant enjoyment, right, that is encouraged more. And people, if they don't get that instant gratification, that standard is not acceptable anymore now. But in the dharmic framework, one has to first engage in dharmic principles, you have to engage in dharmic activities, and then by and by doing those prescribed duties, one can earn some material remuneration. In many cases, yagyas, the benedictions are provided by the demigods even for this life, right? Like we see the pastimes of Govardhan Leela, where Krishna wanted to perform. Krishna actually asked his father Nanda Maharaj to stop doing a fire sacrifice for Indra, right? But why were they doing that sacrifice for Indra? Because as farmers, they rely on rain, right, for irrigation. And the rain, the demigod for rain is Indra. He's in charge for it. And so demigods are also materially motivated, and they said, if you offer me my dues, right, oblations, which is a very subtle science of offering, how that offering, when is offered as oblation at the fire, how it that offering actually provides the strength for the demigods to themselves enjoy, right? So that's the entire mechanism. But then the demigods then provide the different necessities for life. So we'll study that in detail later in I believe, third and fourth chapter, that is described where Krishna is explaining the process of yajna. But the dharmic framework essentially at least gives the opportunity that eventually somebody would be interested in the ultimate purpose beyond sense gratification, which is what Krishna is trying to explain Arjuna, to work without fruitive mentality. Okay. Now, beyond artha and kama, there is moksha. And here Prabhupada, because his specific mission was to defeat the impersonalist philosophy of merging into the void, or the Brahman, the impersonal Brahman, right? So Prabhupada in his purports, wherever there's an opportunity, he clarifies to avoid confusion, because when you talk about moksha, most people think liberation in a very in a nihilistic way, where one basically loses one identity. And so Prabhupada is making it very clear, he's not talking about that kind of Brahman liberation, but he's talking about personal liberation. So this impersonal idea of liberation is compared to also an illusion for sense gratification, where it's the last snare of Maya, it's the last trick of Maya, where when one is actually seeking an impersonal liberation is also for sense gratification, in the sense that one has figured out that, well, there is no enjoyment in this world, and one is really frustrated and just wants to bring an end to this. And so what is again the prime motivation for this? Sense gratification, in the sense that, well, there's too much, I cannot deal, and there's no possibility to fix uh, the situation in this material world. The only way is to get out of it. But because they don't have the idea about the positive engagement, which is the service of the Supreme Lord Vishnu, and that is something that is pleasing. Service as a friend, could be as a parent, could be as a conjugal lover. So it is not like a slave-like mentality kind of service, but the idea of service is there. And then as soon as you say service, one has to give up sense gratification. Now, that service is not motivated to get some kind of remuneration or enjoyment in return. It is unmotivated, but that enjoyment naturally comes as a byproduct, not that one is seeking out. Just like a parent is serving the child, right? It's a selfless service, right? They don't expect anything in return. But nevertheless, there is a secondary gratification that comes. One gets enjoyment and satisfaction from serving one's child, right? Though the one is not expecting anything in return. So the service is the key, right? But here, when someone wants to get freed from the material world and does not have any positive engagement in the service of the Lord, then it is sense gratificatory. Hey, it's just for my own. It's so much discomfort over here. I just want to be free from it, and that's the kind of liberation I'm seeking. But when the mentality of service is there, then one is not so much concerned about personal comfort. Even at the cost of personal comfort, one would go and serve it. That's why the devotees of Vishnu, they are not really interested in getting even liberation. If they can better execute or better do their service while being in this material world, then they don't even want to go to the spiritual world. They're not seeking personal association. They are happy being in the present situation. Just like the prophets or the empowered messengers of the Lord, why do they appear on this earth? To take Jesus Christ, for instance, right? So he sacrificed his life for a higher cause. So he came for a purpose, right? So it's not for his own personal sense gratification. And so it's a completely different kind of mentality that transcends even impersonal liberation. So after many, many births of engaging different kind of sense gratificatory activities, one might, say that there's enough, I want to get out of it. But they might be caught into this illusory idea of impersonal liberation, right? And beyond that, there are even rare souls who, they not only want to, understand the temporary nature of this world, but they are not attracted by the impersonal liberation. Rather, they want to surrender fully to Vasudeva, Lord Krishna. And such a conviction might not come immediately, right? So that might be the result of after many, many births. So Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate. Krishna says later in Bhagavad Gita, after many, many births, one who has actually understood the truth, one who actually is situated in knowledge, Jnanavan, fully surrenders to me and approaches me. So Arjuna had already accepted Krishna, right? So earlier we discussed where Arjuna was saying that, hey, Krishna, I am presenting my problem to you as a disciple. So he's clarifying that. Otherwise, Krishna would have said, hey, Arjuna is just asking, he's thinking I am his cousin, I am his friend. So just to avoid that kind of doubt, Krishna actually clarifies and tells to Krishna that, hey, no, I'm serious. I'm approaching you as a disciple. And so as Krishna is aware of this, Arjuna is very serious. So now Krishna is instructing him seriously, right? So Krishna will now tell him how to work in Buddhi Yoga or Karma Yoga. So again, Karma Yoga is also referred to as Buddhi Yoga because there is action with intelligence, right? mechanically doing prescribed duties means one is not situated in proper knowledge. But when one acts in proper knowledge, and it destroys all sins, as we read in the previous verses. So the practice of devotional service only for sense gratification of the Lord, not for one's own sense gratification. So again, this is described in detail, in the later chapters. So Buddhi Yoga is the direct communion with the Lord, who is seating as Paramatma in everyone's heart. But that communion does not take place without devotion. One who is therefore situated in devotional or loving service to the Lord, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, attains the stage of Buddhi Yoga by the special grace of the Lord. Only to those who are always engaged in devotional service out of transcendental love does he award the pure knowledge of devotion in love. So, here Srila Prabhupada is giving a glimpse of how this discussion on karma yoga would mature into bhakti yoga as the discussion progresses in the later chapters. So the Buddhi Yoga mentioned in this verse is devotional service to the Lord. The word Sankhya mentioned here has nothing to do with the atheistic philosophy of Sankhya. We already talked about that. So real Sankhya is described in Srimad Bhagavatam. We talked about that. This was presented by Lord Kapila Muni. Okay, one point over here is the ultimate purpose of this is still the same. One might start with the analytical study of matter and then how it is different from the soul, or one starts in bhakti yoga, right? Ultimately, there is no distinction. The goal of both is again Krishna, right? And loving service to Krishna. So later, Krishna actually clarifies that, those who are not very intelligent, they think that, hey, these two are different paths, right? But ultimately, it might appear like that. You're approaching the same subject from two different perspectives, but ultimate goal is still the same. So there is no difference. Ultimately, the whole purpose of understanding different divisions of matter and how it is different from the soul is again to bring one to the conclusion of how one should act, how one should behave, for what purpose, what is its higher goal, right? So ultimately, it still leads to that. Right? It just begins from a more analytical base, right? But if one really understands Sankhya, then one will think, okay, and why is it like that? Yeah, what is the purpose? So again, it will bring you to the objective, which is Krishna. And how do you get that? Well, you have to do something, right? So that is karma, and not just karma kanda, but it's karma yoga. Yoga means to link with the Supreme. So, of course, atheistic Sankhya has nothing to do with Bhakti Yoga. So, why people they see they are different is the confusion is created, as I said, is that there was an atheistic philosopher also by the name of Kapila, and who also presented Sankhya Yoga. And if you look at his philosophy, then it's all atheistic. It's not theistic. He has removed the soul, super soul, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead aspect of that philosophy, and it's just completely on a material framework. And so people who have read that philosophy and only familiar with that philosophy, they might think that, oh, when Krishna is talking about Sankhya in this verse, he is referring to the Sankhya philosophy, this atheistic Sankhya philosophy presented by the atheist Kapila. So Srila Prabhupada is clarifying that no. It's not that Sankhya. There's nothing to do with the atheistic philosophy of Sankhya, because so there are so many commentators who have commented on Bhagavad Gita. They have, and in all these different kind of misconceptions they develop, and this is one of the misconceptions that people when they study it, and they might sound very knowledgeable, right? And they might even talk in a very technical way, and they say somebody, it might appear that he was really studied, might say, oh, this Sankhya is referring to the Sankhya, the atheistic Sankhya of Kapila. And the common man might be carried away by that, right? So Srila Prabhupada is addressing those misconceptions, is presenting, so to establish a purely devotional and a Vaishnava Siddhanta, and not an some sort of the atheistic interpretation of Bhagavad Gita, and that would defeat the purpose completely. Okay, so one should understand that Bhakti Yoga means to work in Krishna consciousness, in full bliss and knowledge of devotional service. One who works for the satisfaction of the Lord only, however difficult such work may be, is working under the principles of Buddhi Yoga and finds himself always in transcendental bliss. By such transcendental engagement, one achieves all transcendental understanding automatically by the grace of the Lord. Thus, his liberation is complete in itself, without his making extraneous endeavors to acquire knowledge. Right? So, after Karma Yoga, there is Jnana Yoga. Krishna would explain that. Okay, first, he's asking Arjuna to act without material motives. Then he says, well, initially one might have material motives, but the ultimate purpose is to get perfect knowledge. And once that get knowledge, one doesn't stop there. One now acts in that knowledge. Earlier one was acting without that knowledge, right? One is just doing what the prescribed duties are, but they don't know what is the purpose, why they are doing it, right? That it is for satisfaction of Vishnu. They might not know it. It's like a child. I gave this example last time. Child, if I am teaching my son, hey, you have to do math, you have to do English, you have to do this, he doesn't, or I'm asking he to, first when they learn how to write letters, he doesn't know what I'm asking him to do, that these are called letters. I'm just saying, you just scribble this, follow the dots, and then you say A, then you trace other set of dots and you call it B. He has no idea what is this, that these are letters, why he is learning, right? And what will happen, what is the benefit after once he learns, right? He has no idea. He might not like doing it, or he might do it for the fun. He likes doing it, but it's just fun for him. In either case, whether he likes or not, there's no way for him to really understand the bigger perspective. So that's where everyone begins, even for a spiritual path. So the prescribed duties, one might just mechanically do it, but they don't know the ultimate purpose. But the ultimate purpose is that they should acquire the knowledge, that finally they will know, okay, why I am doing it, what is the purpose, right? Why it was described to be done in this particular way. And when they get the knowledge, what do? Do they stop learning? No, they still do. They still act on it. But now there is an ocean of difference. Earlier they were doing it mechanically, but now they know the purpose for which they are doing it. So there is a much difference between the work in Krishna consciousness and work for fruitive results. So that is the difference. Because earlier, when one doesn't know the real purpose, then what is the motivation? Just like a child, I have to motivate, hey, if you do this, I'll give you a toy, or you get a cookie, or some sort of allurement. And sometimes that doesn't work, then we have to punish, or like kind of threat. If you don't do this, then you get this punishment. So these fruitive results, again, these are allurements for us to get engaged in that activity, if that's what it takes, right? But when the child really knows why I am acting, right, then he doesn't need the allurements. Then the child becomes sincere, right? And he works for a higher cause. And when that, right? So same thing, that the prescribed duties are there, and there is a fruitive. Apparently, even the Vedas are prescribing those fruitive motivation, but that's just an allurement for people who would otherwise not act. That doesn't mean it's a false. It's they do get those benefits. Just like when I say my child, hey, I'll get you a cookie or a toy. It's not that I don't give, I do give, right? But it's, again, that's not the real reason I am engaging the child in their activities. So Vedas, when they say that this kind of fruitive benedictions that one would get, it's not that they are false, they are true, but there is a higher purpose. The higher purpose is that, well, eventually one will understand and one will question, what is the point of this, right? And then one would acquire the real knowledge, and that is Jnana Yoga. And when one gets that Jnana, doesn't mean that one stops karma, right? One would now continue to act, but with proper knowledge. And so here Srila Prabhupada is referring the word Krishna consciousness, or with the consciousness that it is set for the satisfaction of Krishna, which is also in later Bhagavad Gita referred to as Buddhi Yoga. So now eventually they kind of merge, though they are kind of starting at a different branches, because once one gets knowledge, it's not that they stop acting. So ultimately, the final picture of Bhakti Yoga means it's encompasses all yoga. There is Sankhya, there is Buddhi Yoga, there is Karma Yoga. All of them have to be in place for Bhakti Yoga to fully manifest, right? Because when you're serving the Lord, you're serving with your mind, your knowledge, your body, your actions in all possible ways, right? So it might appear that these are all different paths, right? So especially when one is starting, but they all kind of confluence together, and it serves the say higher purpose. And that's why at the end of the second chapter and at the end of the third chapter, fourth chapter, Arjuna is still not getting it as Krishna is explaining. He says, that's why he asks question to Krishna. He said, Krishna, you asked me to do this, karma first. You say you do your prescribed duties. Now you're saying knowledge is more important. Then why are you asking me to engage in this ghastly war, right? So now can you clarify this doubt? Is which one is more important? Is it really work or is it jnana? So he still does not get it. Then Krishna, he tries to explain that it's not exclusive. It's not either or kind of thing, right? It's not that you gain knowledge and you stop working. So that's how the conversation follows. So in the first verse itself, it's a long purport, but Srila Prabhupada is setting the stage and is addressing some of the misconceptions. Any questions on this one? Okay, next verse number 40. Nihabhikrama nasosti pratyavayo na vidyate svalpyam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Purport. Activity in Krishna consciousness or acting for the benefit of Krishna without expectation of sense gratification is the highest transcendental quality of work. Even if some makes a small beginning on this path, right, finds no impediment. And whatever one has actually begun cannot be lost at any stage. In the material world, what we see is that if it is not completed, a job half done is not done, kind of thing, right? If you don't achieve success, it's a failure. The whole attempt becomes a failure. Just like if somebody tries to launch a new product, and then you want to be the first person to launch it, right? The best product, at a good price, something that is affordable, and say your competition somehow figures it out, or maybe they happen to work on the same thing, but they launch it before you, right? So they get an upper edge, or they get the larger market share, or and then there is especially if that player is already established, then they already have so much brand recognition, and so it's very difficult for the newcomer or somebody who is just a startup, right, to kind of break into that market. They might have a great idea, but before they implement, the incumbent already implements it, right? So then all their work that they have done, it's kind of a waste. Just one example, but there could be other examples. So time is of essence, and so otherwise all their effort would be wasted. But when it comes to bhakti yoga or in devotion, it's not like that, right? So whatever progress one has done, we are not competing against anyone, right? It's not that there are limited seats in the spiritual world. If somebody is aspiring to reach the spiritual world, ultimately devotees are not interested in liberation, but even if somebody is motivated by that, as long as they are approaching Krishna, that's still good goal to have. But it's not that there are limited seats and I need to outperform someone else who is practicing spirituality as well. It's not like that. Rather, the whole idea of spirituality is that we want others to succeed. We see that we are inferior to others. We genuinely feel that so you see the good in others. You see others as more competent than you, and so there is no envy. So it's a completely different mentality. So anyway, there is no loss. When one starts on this path, even if it is not finished, one gets an opportunity to again begin from where they left, right? So in that sense, it's different from different materialistic activities. 1% done in Krishna consciousness bears permanent results, so that the next beginning is from the point of 2%. Whereas in material activity, without 100% success, there is no profit. So there are many different instances. So this example is given Ajamil. He was born in a good Brahmana family. He was practicing spirituality very nicely. Then he got into bad association and then engaged in sinful life all his life. Just at the time of the death, because he had that good samskaras early in his life, he had named his son, who had begotten through a prostitute, he had named him Narayana for whatever reason, right? Because he had this good samskaras from his early life. At the time of his death, when the Yamdutas came to extract his soul out of his body, or extract him out of his body, he was so attached to his son that he called out his son Narayana. But then the Lord is absolute. He doesn't make distinction. He says, he called my name, doesn't matter. He was not referring to me. And so just by one utterance of the holy name of the Lord, all the sinful reactions are destroyed. So anyway, Prabhupada is trying to make the point that though he was deviated and he engaged in sinful activities, by the grace of the Lord, somehow he had named his son as a Narayana, and he remembered Narayana at the time of his life. So it's not, that good samskaras that he had previously, though they were kind of overshadowed for some time, he was able to, recollect or get that remembrance when it was critical. So here Prabhupada is quoting a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a very, very important verse. Yeah, if someone gives up one's occupational duties and works in Krishna consciousness, and then falls down on account of not completing his work, then what is a loss? Right? What can one gain even if one performs his material activities perfectly? So he says if one does occupational, what is it? Yeah, so if one gives up one's occupation duties according to one's varna, right, for a higher cause, right? Generally, it is recommended, as it was recommended to Arjuna, that hey, you work with a devotional attitude. At the same time, you should not give up your occupational duties. So that is the ideal. But this is the extreme condition that is given, or an extreme case scenario where somebody has already perfected his life. Arjuna is still not perfected his life, right? He was carried away emotionally. But when one has achieved perfection, then one is not even obliged to perform occupational duties. One is perfected. But as long as one is not perfected, they are impelled by the modes of the nature, then one is recommended to perform occupational duties. So here when it says someone who gives up occupational duties is referring to perfectly realized souls who might not be acting within the prescriptions of the Varnas. So then what are they doing, right? Not that they are acting whimsically, but they're still interested in devotional service or bhakti yoga or Krishna consciousness. And somehow or other, even after achieving that such a high state, if they fall down from the path. So the example of that is Bharata Maharaj. So Bharata Maharaj, see the whole Bharat Varsha is named after him. Bharata Maharaj was son of Rishabdev, right? Rishabdev had 100 sons. The eldest was Bharat Maharaj, and he had given up he was the ruler of the entire earth. So he gave up his kingdom and then went to the forest, and he was performing austerities, and he was remembering, he was meditating on the super soul, he was performing bhakti yoga. So now he had given up all his occupational duties, right? But then he was almost on the state of bhava, where one has very strong loving feelings for the Supreme Lord. But then somehow or other he got attached to a baby deer. and so much so that he was all, started getting, because the baby deer had lost its mother, and so he thought no one's there to take care of him, so I'm going to take care of the baby deer in my ashram. Now slowly he used to, every day used to feed him, make sure that it's not feeling cold. Sometimes he's worried some carnivore animal would come and eat him. In this way, he got so attached to that deer, his attention was so much focused on it. This is after him renouncing, his family, his opulence, his kingdom, and so much wealth. He finally got attached to a deer, and he gave up his spiritual practice, or he might be half focusing on it. And then finally, one day, he was not able to find the deer. So he thought, oh, he failed in protecting the deer, and he felt very miserable, and he gave up his life. So, and because he was thinking of deer at the time of the death, he became a deer in his next life. Now, whatever progress that he had made did not go waste, because in the body of a deer, by the grace of the Supreme Lord, he was able to remember his past life and how he had become a deer. And so then he took up spirituality even in the body of a deer, which is very unusual, but because he had made so much progress, that special opportunity was there for him, and he had that remembrance. And so he used to always be around the hermitage of the sages who are performing spirituality. So he used to get their association in the body of a deer. Then he finally quit the body of the deer naturally, after, as the body gets old and dies. The next life, he was born in the son of a Brahmana. And this is the life of Jad Bharat. Many of you might have heard about its story. In some of the vernacular languages also we say, this person is Jad or Jad Bharat. Don't behave like Jad Bharat. So he knew everything. He remembered all his past lives, but he acted like a deaf and a dumb, a foolish person. And he was, but in the heart, he was always meditating on Vishnu. So again, the point is that if you look at the life of Jad Bharat, he did not lose anything, right? Though he had fall downs, in the sense that he deviated from the path of spirituality, but whatever progress he had made was not lost, and he was able to regain and recollect where he had stopped, and then he was able to continue his journey forward. And that's the point Srila Prabhupada is saying. So even if one falls down, but because one had already made some progress for a higher cause, then what's the loss? On the other hand, if one has not taken up spiritual activities or spiritual path, right, and they are executing their occupational duties perfectly, but they are materially motivated, then what is the gain, right? There is no gain. So this is the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, which is emphasizing the importance of devotional service. So Christians, they say, what profiteth a man if he gain the whole world, yet suffer the loss of eternal soul, right? So that's why they have this saying that don't give your soul to the devil, right? And one might if you do a deal with the devil, one might get some material benefit, but then one has given up one's soul. That means there's no they are not pursuing, they are not endeavoring spiritually. So material activities and the results, they end with the body, right? Finally, if nothing ends, if they don't end in itself before the body ends, sometimes if I have a certain amount of wealth, I can spend it before my life ends, and so that might be exhausted even before the body dies. But if somehow somebody might have opulence that can outlive the body, but then the body will come to an end, right? And so that's why many people, they die with so much wealth. And in most cases, those who are uber rich, many times we see that they work hard so much and they accumulate so much wealth that they don't even have any time to enjoy that wealth. And by the time they give up or retire, their body is already exhausted and aged, and they might not have long to live. And so they have to just they just quit the body without enjoying anything and accumulating more than that was needed for them. So in either case, material activities, they come to an end. Either they come to an end before the body ends, or the body ends and then they cannot enjoy it. But when one is making any progress in spiritual life, it carries along with the person even after the loss of the body. At least one is sure that in the next life they will be born as a human being, either in the family of a cultured brahmana, so the samskaras are there, they get good samskaras from the childhood and they can continue their spiritual practice, or they could be born in a rich aristocratic family, so that they don't have to worry about um, you know maintaining their body, or spend so much time and energy in putting bread on the table. Rather they can have that opportunity that they can spend more time and energy for spiritual endeavors. Of course the danger is there when there is more wealth, that they might be again allured by it, and they might not take up spiritual path, just like the sons of Kuvera, and they might get deviated again. So yeah, so being born in a family of a devotees is much of a greater boon, because at least one has those good samskaras and they can continue. So this is another verse in Bhagavad Gita that Srila Prabhupada is summarizing over here, where Krishna actually saying that. So this is the unique quality of work done in Krishna consciousness. I think we'll stop over here. So this purports a little long. Yeah. So we did read through verse number 53, but then we only did 2 purports. That's all right. But at least you get the theme of it, and we'll try to go over the remaining. No, we read until 45. Yes, so we read until 45. Okay. Anyone has any questions before we end today's class? Questions or comments? Okay. If there are no questions, I think we can end the class over here. Yes, Kashyap Prabhu, you had a question.
Why did Krishna got the Sankhya philosophy here, like in verse 30, I think 40, I guess, or 39? So why did, I mean, was he only referencing that, like, in Sankhya philosophy, it was described like this? Is it what he's saying, or?
Yeah, he's saying that, hey, so far I've been explaining you the nature of the soul and how it is different from the matter. And so that explanation was in an analytical framework. That's what he's saying.
Okay.
And now I'm going to explain you things from another perspective, which is working without fruitive results.
So is that mean the things that were described before this verse is actually a Sankhya, and from now he's trying to explain the karma yoga or something like that?
Yes. So
Okay.
specifically the verses which describe the nature of the soul. So if you look at verse number 27 and also I think even before that, right? So soul can never be cut into pieces, or everything, right? Starting from 26, 25 individual souls. See, it's a long description of the soul. So everything pretty much from so everything that pervades the body, verse number 16, 17. See, so description of soul is pretty long. Embodied soul, matter. So all of this is Sankhya,
Okay.
right from the beginning of the chapter all the way up until that verse. You can say, but there is a minor theme that's going on after Sankhya, which is where he's saying that people, honor, dishonor, considering a specific duty, you should fight. So that is more like a worldly consideration. See, it will bring you infamy. So that's not exactly analytical. So, in one way you can take this out of the Sankhya philosophy perspective, but this is just worldly consideration. He's saying, there should not be any hesitation. If you neglect your duties, you lose your reputation. People will, say disrespectable things for you. They will insult you. So this is not really part of Sankhya, but it's a small theme, just after the description of Sankhya that comes. But in general, the vast majority of those verses were Sankhya. Right? This is also infamy. Yeah. Does it help?
Yeah, yeah. No, I was thinking from 39 onwards, he was probably starting Sankhya philosophy, but it's
No, no,
actually
no.
the other way. Like
Yeah.
85.
See, thus far, he's saying thus so far I have explained you through analytical study. Now you listen. Now what I'm going to speak is from the perspective of working without fruitive results, and that's why now he's saying that, hey, you should. He talks about being resolute in purpose, not being attracted by Vedic allurements, right? Because those are fruitive. I want so he's focusing on working without fruitive results. The people of small knowledge, they work for fruitive results.
Got
Right?
it.
So he's explaining that perspective now. So he's switching gears here.
Makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If not, I think we can end the class here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.